Okay, let's talk about spring. Now, I know that probably sounds delusional. I'm actually currently watching a snowstorm actively cover Milwaukee in snow as I record this. It's almost like Mother Nature knew I was going to record a spring video today, and she decided to humble me. Regardless, when you work in a product-based business, especially one where you need the lead time like I do for soap, you gotta think about things way in advance. And actually, spring is one of those seasons that I always feel like I'm playing catch up because what precedes it is such a hectic time. Normally, the way I time out planning for a new collection is I pick the launch date and I work backwards from there. So once I know the date that I plan to launch all of the products, I back it up 4 weeks to know my absolute deadline for making soaps in order to have them in time for the launch. And then I work a little bit back from that to know when I need to be testing all of the fragrance oils, ordering like the larger versions, because obviously I order sample sizes to test them out. So I want to test all the fragrance oils, make sure they perform well in soap. There's certain fragrance suppliers where I can just trust their information. Like Brambleberry is really good about soap performance and giving you detailed notes before you even purchase a fragrance oil. So usually they're pretty trustworthy in terms of soap, but even sometimes with candles, you don't quite know. There might be some discoloration. Anyway, I have to leave time to test. Then working back from when I need to test, I also have to decide when I'm gonna order my samples by, because I have to figure out just which fragrances I like before I test any of them. And before I order samples, I have to figure out like what's my inspiration. So normally I like to be at least like 3 months ahead of a seasonal launch when I'm like ordering my samples. But honestly, like with the holidays, it's just really hard to be super on top of it. This year, I had quite a few samples that I sort of pulled from already, and then I was able to order just a few more that I knew were like in the general direction I wanted to go. So I definitely had samples that I was gravitating towards, but even in terms of like testing soaps this year, everything's just been thrown off by this move to the new space. So last year, I was moving into my other space in January, so that was also hectic. And then this year, moving to a new space. So who knows what next year will feel like. Maybe this will all go a lot smoother and I'm just unaware of how much these moves have like taken over the month. But that's the general timeline I try and shoot for. That's also how I operate when it comes to summer and fall and holiday. This year, what's really nice is that I know that I have some standout sellers from 2022 that I'll definitely come back to. It's not that every scent that I have chosen is like a knockout, but I know which ones are for sure sellers. So for example, with spring this year, I'm definitely bringing back my Apple Blossom scent because that was super popular. Especially around like Mother's Day, I feel like people just really went for it. And in spring and early summer, it was like the easiest one for me to sell. So that's coming back. But the other ones I had last spring just like weren't as good of performers. So I'm ditching them and looking for new inspiration. The first step for me is figuring out what is my inspiration for this upcoming season. Sometimes there is a specific fragrance oil that I've smelled that I'm like, this has to be included. I want to build a collection around this. Sometimes there's a movie or a song or something that gives me the vibe that I want to go for. And sometimes I just go straight to Pinterest. Pinterest is always a part of the planning process just because I like to have a visual representation of the sort of energy I'm going for each season. Sometimes that's just where I start and I'll just scroll until I find an image that really speaks to me. And this spring, it's very clear to me that I was in like a moody spring vibe. I had a bit of a tough fall this year, which is such a bummer because I love fall, but a lot of things happening. This holiday season was really hectic. This month I've just been like overwhelmed. And so when it came to like what sort of aesthetics and like mood I was searching out, it felt very dramatic, very sort of like dark. And that, I think, is the reality with spring. There's obviously the beauty of like new flowers and the weather starting to get warmer. But especially in Wisconsin, there's still a lot of like fog and rainy days and like dark, cloudy days. Like there's still not an overwhelming amount of sunshine in spring. And I found these visuals of these sort of like mossy green fields and sort of like dark academia, candles in a library, just all of that sort of thing. And I felt like I could place myself in that mood and like really feel it. Like I could smell it and just like really experience it. And so that's sort of what I pulled together for my mood board this spring. And I really just like am loving the color palette of these images as well. I think it's one that normally feels a little bit more fall. Like if I showed you this inspiration board and said it was for fall, I don't think that would be shocking. But I wanted to like bring some of that to spring. There is a connection between the two, and I wanted to sort of like translate those energies a little bit. And I know that this probably sounds like more thought than I need to put in to like 4 cents for candles and soap, but this is part of the fun for me. And even if it doesn't necessarily translate in the final product, or if people don't pick up on it and they're just there to pick up a candle and see what it smells like, that's fine with me. I really like this part, and this is part of the like creative process that keeps me engaged in this business, which is crucial because otherwise I will lose interest. That's just a side note anyway. Another thing I have to keep in mind though, as I'm looking at all of these images and picking scents that go along with it, is that I do have to be realistic about what people are looking for from spring candles and spring soaps. So as much as I am feeling this like moody romantic vibe, that's not necessarily what's going to sell, and I have to be cautious not to push too far in one direction that I alienate people who are just looking for like spring candles. I mean, most people in spring are looking for something light and floral.
Floral for spring. Groundbreaking.
And that's what I think is nice about the fact that I'll be bringing my apple blossom scent back, is that that's exactly what it is. It's floral. It's got a little bit of a fruity note to it. It's not like sweet fruit, just like a freshness and a crispness that I think is perfect for spring. So I've got something that I think will appease people if that's specifically what they're looking for. But I also just wanted to play around with these other scents. So once I knew that was the vibe, I have that in the back of my mind as I'm smelling fragrance oil samples. And there's certain ones that maybe I like, but I think, not right for this season. This might be something for another year. And it does help me narrow down what I'm looking for. The other thing I always have to keep in mind when I'm making a collection, especially because I only have the bandwidth to do about 4 scents. Sometimes I only do 3. It depends on what I come across, but I just don't have the production capabilities to make like 10 scents every season, 10 new scents. And so I really want to offer as much variety as I can within the 4 fragrances that I pull. So although it's spring and we're like sort of falling under that umbrella of like, you know, the general idea of spring. Like I'm not going to put a mulled cider in a spring line. I also want to make sure that like if somebody likes woodsy scents, there's one for them. If somebody likes floral scents, there's one for them. If somebody likes fruity scents, there's one for them. Just trying to be as all-encompassing as possible without feeling like scattered. It's like this balance between a cohesive line and a line with variety is like, I don't know, I'm still definitely experimenting with how exactly to like nail that balance. After smelling my fragrance oils with this like inspiration board in the back of my head, I had it narrowed down to a few, but then the important thing is really to like line them up and smell them together sort of over and over again. So sometimes I'm smelling a fragrance within this like 20 sample test that I've done, and it's like I need to put them all together, see how they perform as a collection. And that's when I can really swap things out. There was one fragrance oil that I swore I was going to use because I just love it. It will be coming back at some point because I'm obsessed with it. But when I lined it up with the other things, it felt like something was missing, and it felt like it just didn't fit with what I had. So that's where it's helpful to, like, again, make sure I have a like clear idea of what I want, deciding, okay, yes, yes, no, yes, and working from there. And then the last thing I do, aside from testing the fragrances to make sure they work, is coming up with the names for all of the scents. And this part is also so fun. It's another one where there's really no formula to how I do it. It's kind of just that when I know, I know. And what I normally do is I get out like a spreadsheet and I type in all of the fragrance notes for whichever fragrance I'm working on. So, it's like jasmine, ginger, pear, whatever. Write them all out. And then just sort of seeing, I also smell the fragrance and try and imagine like what the vibe is that I get from the fragrance. Because sometimes just because it has a certain fragrance note, if that's not the one that like really hits you or really like stays with you from the candle or the soap, it's not worth basing a name around it, because people are going to have an expectation when they hear a name, what they'll be coming up against. And especially as someone who sells online, I have to do my best to like be as informative as possible to someone who is buying online without being able to smell something first. In the future, I'd love to do sample sets and be able to like let people take little votives, order little votives and smell things before they buy a big scent. But currently, I don't have the bandwidth for that. So in the meantime, I just want to be really evocative with my names so that people sort of like pick up on what the energy is. So I'll give you a behind the scenes of one of the scents that I have named this year. I'm not going to announce all of them yet because I do want to make sure. I've got a few things I need to tweak before I'm 100% sure on these, but there's one I'm definitely sure of, and so I thought I'd share a little bit about how I decided naming that. So for this fragrance, there are some citrus notes. There's also some floral notes. To me, it mainly feels floral, but not in like an overwhelming grandma kind of way. It's a really nice floral, but there's also enough sort of base notes in there that it is warm and has definitely some like drama to it. Like it's not your typical like light, happy floral. And so initially, one of the fragrance notes is a violet. And so I honestly like go to thesaurus.com and type in initial words that I think of and just like see what other words come up, because usually there's like a more poetic adjective to use or something like that. But the trouble with something like wilting violet or withered violet was another one. I love the way it sounds, but I'm afraid that people are going to think you mean like a rotting plant. Like rotting plants don't smell good. Like, why would I buy something called that? So it's one of those things that just because I like the way it sounds, I had to put it aside because I don't think it is, from a marketing standpoint, the right choice. But I knew that like, okay, this is like the right direction. So I just kept sort of poking around thesaurus.com. I pulled in some of the other fragrance notes. I was like, okay, well, maybe violet's not the right one to go with. I don't know what made me think of the word moonlit, but I love the idea of this like nighttime sort of atmosphere. And so at first it was like moonlit prairie. No, like prairie's not the right word. Prairie is too grassy. This is more floral. So I landed on moonlit garden. So one of the scents for spring will be moonlit garden. It is so delightful. It's a great candle for like a very romantic vibe. It's got florals, but like I said, it's got a lot of warmth to it. There's some musk in there, some cashmere notes, and I'm very excited about it. So that's just one example. I try and do that for all of them. Sometimes I think I've picked the name and then I let it simmer and it's like, no, not quite right, and I go back to revise it. But once I have the name, I can start designing the labels for the candles and the soap. And yeah, the last thing is really sort of like the color palette. Also, something I want to keep in mind in terms of what sells for a certain season. And although I really like these dark, moody colors, I have to be careful with that for spring. I think after a long winter, that might not be what they want right now. So I have to be very careful with what my spring color palette will be, but that's another thing that factors in, and I just like really try to be thoughtful about and also offer variety, because that's another thing where I don't want sort of all the same colors. I want people to be able to feel like they can sort of gravitate towards something that matches the decor in their bathroom or wherever they're putting this soap. So I'm hoping to launch this collection in early March. I don't have an exact date picked out. I have one in mind, but I also like to give myself the flexibility that if I have a tough month or if something comes up, I don't want to kill myself getting products out. So I always like leave it up in the air until it's a little bit closer. So I'm not going to commit to a date here, but just stay tuned. You can always follow Hello Bushyl on Instagram. That's when I announce all of this stuff. It's the best place to find me, or you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, bushyl.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear in the comments what some of your favorite spring scents are, just fragrance notes or perfumes or anything that you really love. I'd love to hear from you, and I will see you in the next video.